Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming early. I always like to give you guys some hidden insight that no one else knows about. So when your friends come and they're here at 3 o'clock, you can say, well, did you know? And they'll say, oh, no, I didn't. And they'll think you guys are so smart. So that's what my goal is. First, we'll talk a little bit about the program, and then I'll take questions. And if I can't answer them now, I'll get back to you. But, it's interesting how certain things are tied to other things. Something I discovered, okay, perhaps we won't do that right now while I'm talking. So we're playing the Dvorak New World Symphony in May. The Dvorak New World Symphony is a great work. In May, I try to perform those works that people ask for. It's called a request concert, listener's choice. And we had so many people asking for the Dvorak New World Symphony. That was a couple years ago before the pandemic hit us and stopped us from doing things. And so it's on the program, and we're fulfilling the requests from 2 years ago. So what does the Dvorak New World Symphony in May have to do with our concert today? Well, actually, this is what we can tell your friends, because you're going to be the experts now. So, I think it was 1892, America, the United States, was gaining a reputation as being a world power. They were no longer the little colony that defeated the English. Industrially, they were doing quite well, and they were rising among the ranks. However, in terms of music, they still didn't have their own identity. You hear of groups wanting their own identity. Music-wise, America didn't have their own identity in the 1890s. If you wanted to be a composer, you would go to Europe and learn the language of European music. Beethoven, Haydn, Brahms. In 1890s, Brahms and Wagner, they were the kings of music. So in New York, the Academy of Music decided, we're going to invite Antonin Dvorak from Bohemia to teach us how we can make our own musical identity. Because Dvorak took the music of the Czech people, Bohemia is what they call themselves at that point, took the music of the Czech people and made it internationally famous. Well, Mr. Dvorak, would you come to the U.S. and help us make our music famous? So he said yes. He was here for 3 years. The first year, he went around listening to music, and he wrote the New World Symphony. New World meaning the United States. In his second year, he wrote the American String Quartet. In the third year, he wrote the Dvorak Cello Concerto, which is a very famous cello concerto. So what was his answer? Well, his answer was in his New World Symphony. what you probably know, especially in the second movement, is that the second movement is a Negro spiritual. We call it Going Home. Now, Dvorak wrote it on his own, but he had heard lots of spirituals in his journeys around the United States. His assistant conductor was Burley. Burley was a wonderful baritone, and he would sing Negro spirituals that his father had taught him. His father was a slave and freed, and Burley would sing these spirituals to Dvorak, and Dvorak loved them. Now, these spirituals were hundreds of years old. They had started in the time of slavery, and it had continued for centuries. Dvorak was so fascinated with these spirituals that he included them in his New World Symphony. Now, we all know the spiritual Going Home. However, in the other movements, there's also spirituals in it. And so we see for the first time Negro music, as they called it in those days, was incorporated into a symphonic form. So as Dvorak left, he said, if you want a music that is rich and has lots of promise, then use the music of the spirituals. Use the rhythms of the Negro dance. The dance rhythms that we talk about are also in the New World Symphony. So, it wasn't until William Grant Still, many years later, about 40 years later, that a symphony actually existed. William Grant Still, in his Afro-American Symphony, was the first black composer to actually incorporate black idioms into his music. Specifically, he used spirituals and he used blues. Now, when we listen to the spirituals in this symphony, we hear that it's very authentic. He would visit churches, listen to these spirituals, and write them down. And so he put them into his music. Blues came later. At first, the blues were not in the concert hall and not in the church, but in some of your old Saturday night places. And so what eventually happened was that some of these blues musicians who played on Saturday night were hired by churches, and they played on Sunday morning as well in church. And so the spirituals got a little bit of overhaul, and they became gospel music. The blues, as well, overhauled American popular music. If you listen to Elvis Presley, what you have is a blues song sped up. And that was the beginning of rock and roll. Rock and roll was started by taking blues and making it go faster. So Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, they all took the standard 12-bar blues, sped it up, and then came rock and roll. So rock and roll started with the blues. What happens if you take the blues and you make it go faster? You add a little more rhythm to it, a little heavier bass. Then you have rhythm and blues. So what if you take the rock and roll and you play with the rhythm, de-emphasize the melody, and talk. But talk not necessarily in a straightforward manner, but always off the beat. That's called syncopation. When you're talking off the beat and it doesn't come on the beat, that's syncopation, which is a very important part of black music. You do that, and what you have is rap. So when you think about how music has evolved over the centuries, a lot was founded in the early times of spirituals, blues. Now, before we talk about the program, let me talk about Florence Price. Florence Price has become very popular now, although her music from the 30s was just wonderful. She was a contemporary of William Grant Still. She wrote just about 300 works, symphonies, concertos, incidental music, lots of vocal music. And she was very popular for a time, but then it kind of faded. Her fame faded when it wasn't popular anymore. And she said, I have two things against me. Number one, I'm a woman. And number two, I'm black. So we are now discovering how wonderful her works are, especially because at this point, you see it so often because they want to do works from women composers and black composers. However, we do music because it's good music. The most important thing is that it's good music and it should be heard. And that's why we do it. Long before it was popular to do the Afro-American Symphony, this orchestra in 1992 performed it right here in Everett, long before it was popular. This same orchestra in 2006 went to Carnegie Hall in New York, and we played it there. What was so exciting about that time was that Carnegie Hall was sold out, and it was the first time since the composer's death in the 1970s that the Afro-American Symphony was played in Carnegie Hall. And at that time, it was the composer and the New York Philharmonic. So as we played it, it was so convincing that we got a standing ovation and 4 curtain calls in Carnegie Hall. Tonight is the first time that we're doing it in Everett again. So you guys, I think you'll certainly enjoy it. Every movement has a special meaning, and I'm sure it's in your program. But every movement contains spirituals and blues, and every movement has a certain meaning to it. I'm sure you'll hear it. I'm sure you'll feel it as we play it. This orchestra tends to be very convincing, so you will hear it. So we begin the program with Florence Price, and we end the program with the Afro-American Symphony. In the middle, we have a French composer. We do want to be international, and our concert master, Patrice, will do a fine job with the Saint-Saëns. Now, this is a very tricky piece. You'll see that it changes tempos and it changes moods quite often. To me, it sounds almost Spanish, even though the composer is French. Saint-Saëns is one of my favorite composers. He had to deal with young upstarts like Debussy and Ravel, who said his music was old-fashioned. He liked German music too much. He liked too much Wagner. We need our own voice. It's not very French. Well, years later, there's probably a lot more Saint-Saëns being performed than Debussy or Ravel. And so we're very lucky to have a concert master who can handle this very difficult work. And you'll see it go through all kind of changes and moods, tempos. Very tough, but very exciting. So in our concert, we start with just the strings. Normally when concert starts, it's with a big bang. But this is with just strings. And that second movement of her string quartet, played by the full orchestra, by the full string section, it begins with a spiritual. In the middle, there's a dance. And it ends with the spiritual again. So the concert is not long, but it's very exciting, and it has lots and lots of variety. So I've talked for a long time. I want to give you a little time to ask questions that you might have. If you just raise your hand, I'll entertain your questions. Yes, one and then two. So the question was, did William Grant Still study anywhere outside of the United States? He wanted to, but his big composition training came from Oberlin in Ohio, and then the New England Conservatory. So those are his two main places. He wanted to, but he never made it outside of the U.S. Not to my knowledge. But Oberlin and New England were the places where he got his training. Yes? Yeah, so the three big works, he did one work a year. The first one was the symphony, New World Symphony. The second one was the American String Quartet. And so it's a quartet, two violins, viola, and cello. And he dedicated to American themes. Lots of rhythm. It was very exciting. And then the third one was the cello concerto. His cello concerto was the last work. It was his third year. So it's the last work he wrote before he left to go back to Bohemia, or the Czech Republic as we call it now. Any more? Yes. Yes. The New World Symphony was called the Ninth Symphony. It was his Ninth Symphony. It was the only one written in the United States. He had written 8 symphonies beforehand. So his 8th symphony, which is absolutely gorgeous, we've played that several times. And that 7th and 8th symphonies were the ones who gave him international fame. So after his 8th symphony, people wanted him to come and tell them how they could create a music that would represent their country. And so when he wrote this, it was his 9th and final symphony. You're right. It's the 9th symphony. And although it's called the 9th symphony, people like to call it the New World because it's specific to the United States. I'll take one more question. Yes. Yes. Now, my doctorate degree included a dissertation on the Afro-American Symphony. I analyzed it not just in your typical way, but I analyzed the spirituals, the blues, the big band, the gospel, all in this symphony. And his daughter read my work, and she gifted me his original score. So tonight, when you see me turn pages, I'll do it very gently, because this score was printed in 1935. So his daughter gave me this score, through the Everett Orchestra, I got the score and parts. And so in this particular score, he has all of his markings on the things that he changed. He changed a lot of things from the first time, and he revised. So it's the revised score. A lot of orchestras have not seen the revisions, but we have, because I see his writing, and we follow what he wanted. After the inaugural presentation, he decided, well, I want to change this and I want to change that. And we have that, and that's what you'll hear tonight. Yes. Well, thank you so much. Let me know. Yes. Please let me know how you like it. I think you're going to enjoy it. If you feel like stomping your foot and clapping your hands, be my guest. In some situations, when people hear the third movement, they get up and dance. Well, if you want to, there's room up here. It won't bother us one bit. So if you want to dance and shout hallelujah, it's fine with me. Thank you.